Today in our penultimate day of Final Fantasy spoilers, we get an equipment that's almost definitely good in Soul Sisters, a spicy new Dimir artifact legend, a welcoming vampire effect for Legends decks, and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Sephiroth, and it's time for another daily dose of Final Fantasy spoilers. So we've nearly reached the end of our super long 3-week spoiler season. We get the full set tomorrow, but today we still got some super cool cards to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking spicy new Final Fantasy cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Second, if you need any of these cards, you can order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Anyway, let's talk some Final Fantasy. First up today, we get a card that I've literally been waiting for through this entire 3-week spoiler season. We only have 1 day left to go, but I finally get to say we have a card that is good in Soul Sisters, and that is Excalibur II. So Excalibur II, 1 mana legendary equipment. It says whenever you gain life, put a charge counter on it, and then equip creature gets +1/+1 for each charge counter on it, and you can equip it for 3. So Excalibur II, it essentially lets you make any creature into an Ajani's Pridemate. Actually, it's even better than that, because you can just play Excalibur II on turn 1. Even if it's not equipped to a creature, you're going to start getting counters as you gain life, and then eventually you just get the mana, stick it on a flyer, smash your opponent for a huge amount of damage, and this card's going to be very popular. Wizards recently said that if you go back through the entire history of Magic Arena, the most wild card crafted card is actually Ajani's Pridemate. Arena players in specific, they just love their life gain decks. So I expect this to be a very popular card. How competitive it is, we'll have to wait and see, but a lot of people are going to be playing this in their life gain decks. And I actually think that we might have the pieces to build Soul Sisters in Standard. If you look at the cards that exist in the format right now, we have Case of an Eaten Feast, Hinterland Sanctifier, LSL Core if you want to go into Black, Life Creed's Duel is Soul Sister effects, creatures that gain its life whenever another creature enters. So we have a ton of these options, and we get payoffs like Essence Channeler, Aerith Gainsborough, Exemplar of Light, Minwu, and if you have Excalibur II, that's a lot of payoffs. So you can actually see the deck kind of building itself. The pieces exist. Every spot on the curve is filled with good cards. The only question is, how good will it be? Will life gain, will Soul Sisters actually be a real standard deck? Is it a tier 3 deck? Is it a budget Magic deck? But there's no doubt that the pieces exist to build this deck in Standard now, and I am really excited at the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Soul Sisters could be making a comeback. We've also seen some Amalia Raise the Past decks that are also very life gain focused. I'm not sure if Excalibur is as good there as it would be in just the straight up Soul Sister deck, because Amalia builds are more about trying to fill your graveyard than just gaining as much life as possible and then raising the past everything back into play as a combo kill. But I could see it working there as well. Once you get back to older formats on Arena, like Historic or Timeless, then you get even better options. You get literal Soul Sisters like Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant. Then you get a ton of really powerful 2-mana payoffs. Amalia, Trelisara, Voice of the Blessed, Essence Channeler, Johnny's Pridemate. So I think this card could be a big deal in historic Soul Sisters as well. In Modern, this one's kind of tough. So on one hand, it's a little bit slow. It's so weird to say that a 1-mana equipment's slow, but spending 3 to put on a creature is just kind of a lot in Modern. On the other hand, in Modern, we have Urza Saga, which can tutor this up very consistently and probably play as a 1-of, which is really what you want with a legendary equipment anyway. That's the biggest downside in Standard Soul Sisters, is as a legend, I don't know if you can play 4 of these. You're going to have too many dead draws, but you can definitely play 1 or 2. In Modern, you can play 1 of these and find it consistently with Urza Saga. Plus, in a weird way, Soul Sisters is kind of the best thing going in Modern right now, thanks to Gaia Souls in the energy deck. So you get even better Soul Sisters like Gaia Souls. So maybe Modern Soul Sisters can make a comeback. And then in Commander, I think this card is good in any deck that repeatedly gains small amount of life. So if you're playing some sort of deck that's looking to gain, 50 life at once, you're going to play Beacon of Immortality and double your life total, then Excalibur II isn't great because you only get 1 counter no matter how much life you gain, right? If you gain 1 life, you get a counter. If you gain 100 life all at once, you still only get 1 counter. But it's really good in decks that repeatedly gain small amount of life. So any sort of Soul Sister style decks, the new Final Fantasy Legends that we're already talking about for Standard, plus Aloro, Bilbo, Chocobo, Karlov, Heliod, Dina, any of these decks, I think this card's very much worth playing. Plus, you can play like Stoneforge to tutor it up or whatever. So Excalibur II. The card seems really good. I'm really hyped for this one. Standard Soul Sisters might be making a comeback, and it seems good in life gain decks in older formats too. We also got another equipment, which I'm not as high on for 60 card formats, but it's still pretty sweet in Genju Glove. So Genju Glove, 5-mana equipment, says equipped creature has double strike, and whenever equipped creature attacks, if it's the first combat phase of the turn, untap it. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, and it equips for 3. So Genju Glove, it's basically a more expensive Fire Shrieker, so giving double strike on an equipment, mixed with like a watered down Hexplate Wall Breaker in equipment that has 4 Mirrodin and gives extra combats. The biggest thing to point out with this card is if you get in a hit with the equipped creature, you don't really get a full extra combat because it only untaps the equipped creature and not the rest of your creatures. So that's worth keeping in mind. I guess there's ways you could build around this, like if you give your entire team Vigilance, let's say, you'd be able to attack with it again, but by itself, this is really only giving you an extra combat with the creature that it's equipped to. So I think it's kind of like a fear of missing out. Like, an extra combat, even with one creature, can be pretty powerful. I've definitely lost to a fear of missing out, giving one thing an extra combat before. But Genju Glove, it's just a little bit expensive. My guess is this is not going to be a standard card. I think it's just too expensive for standard. But let's pretend for a minute it could work in standard. What do we do with this card? So there's 2 really sweet synergies that I see with Genju Glove and new Final Fantasy cards. So the first is Cloud. Cloud really likes to get in extra combat so it can trigger its equipment additional times. So if you can like do a Voltron thing and maybe use Stolen Uniform to get Genji Gloves on Cloud along with a Buster Sword, you can get a ridiculous amount of triggers. It's also just a straight up one-shot kill with Lightning Armia 1. Again, I don't know how you do this in standard because you got to play Lightning and dodge removal and then play a 5-mana equipment and get it on the Lightning. But how this works, Lightning has some interesting text where when it deals combat damage to a player, until your next turn, if a source would deal damage to that player or permanent they control, it deals double damage instead. So if we can get Genji Glove on a Lightning and get in 1 unblocked attack, we actually just win the game. I think we deal like 44 damage, 45 damage, something like that. But essentially, you hit with First Strike thanks to Double Strike, and that doubles the damage from the normal damage that you'll deal with Double Strike. And then you get an extra combat, and then, of course, the Double Strike damage will also double the damage, and you hit your opponent again, and you double the damage again, and then you hit your opponent the last time with the second Double Strike. So essentially, one attack ends up being like 40-some damage. So probably not a competitive standard plan, but it's super cool, like, against the odds one-shot kill standard plan. The problem in standard is standard's just so fast right now. If the format slows down, then stuff like the Lightning one-shot kill becomes a lot more practical. But right now, between Monstrous Rage and Corey Steelcutter, Abuelo Awakening, Reanimating Omniscience, a lot of games of standard, you just die by turn 4, so it seems hard to play a 5-mana equipment that you also need a creature on board, and you also have to equip to something. As far as Commander is concerned, I think there's 3 potential homes for this card. So first off, it's good in equipment style decks. Nahiri Forge and Fury, or Your Sun's Glory. The only thing I will say is if you're an equipment deck and you're in red, Hexplate Wallbreaker might just be a better version of this effect since it gives you a real extra combat with all your creatures instead of just one creature, and it has 4 Mirrodin on it. So if you're in red, maybe you play both of them, but I think Hexplate Wallbreaker is a little bit better. But the intriguing part of Genji Gloves is it's colorless, which means if you're playing an equipment deck that isn't in red, like Arna Kennerid or Balin or Kembaka Regent, this card's actually great in those decks. You're able to put it on your commander in theory. Maybe you can kill 2 people in one turn rather than just one. That's the upside of an extra combat in a 4-player format like Commander. So equipment decks, especially ones not in red, home number 1 for this card. Home number 2 is just Voltron style decks. If you're playing a Voltron style deck where you get a lot of value out of getting in damage with your commander, either because you're using it to kill people directly, or maybe you're playing like Obeka and you want a whole bunch of additional upkeeps, or Sergeant John Benton to draw a whole bunch of cards, or Codis to steal a ton of cards off your opponent's deck. Getting an extra combat with your commander in a deck like that is actually incredibly powerful. So Voltron decks, home number 2. The other place that it's really funny is in the pass around the table commanders like Slicer and Alexios. If you put this on a Slicer and Alexios, your opponent's going to have to attack with it, and then you're going to get 2 combats for each opponent, and these cards already kill your opponent super quickly. But if you double strike up in Alexios, or just get 2 combats combat's a turn, everyone's turn with Slicer, the table's gonna die incredibly quickly, so really good there as well. So Genju Glove, probably a little bit too expensive for standard, but a cool Voltron-style equipment for a bunch of different commander decks. We also got a new Dimir legend in Golbez Crystal Collector. So a 2-mana legendary human wizard. It's a 1/4. It says when an artifact you control enters, surveil 1. And at the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more artifacts, return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And then if you control 8 or more artifacts, each opponent loses life equal to that card's power. So Golbez, it kind of reminds me of Contraband Kingpin. This was a card that, well, I guess a long time, I keep forgetting that Kaladesh was like 8 years ago now or something obscene, 7 years ago. But back in the day, Contraband Kingpin actually saw a decent amount of play where you just played this in an artifact deck. You had a 1/4 with lifelink, which was a nice upside. When your artifacts entered, you get to do a little scrying to control your draws. And it was just a really good blocker against aggro decks, kind of your wall against aggro. So I could see Golbez doing something similar, although the formats have shifted a lot since Kaladesh Standard, so we'll have to see if it actually works in 2025 like it did back in 2018 or whatever. As far as more direct comparisons, all very similar to Sarah's Steelseeker, which is a card that is in Standard right now and hasn't really seen play. When an artifact enters, you'll look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you get to put it in your hand. Otherwise, you essentially get to surveil. You can put it in your graveyard if you want to. So I think Sarah's Steelseeker is just kind of like a better version of that surveil mechanic. If you do get a bunch of artifacts on the battlefield, though, being able to raise dead a creature is actually a pretty powerful effect on your end step. And if you get a ton of artifacts and get to start making your opponent lose life, then it gets even better. As far as Standard is concerned, I just don't know where this card fits. There's a couple of issues I see in the short term. I do think this card, like its stats, its abilities, it is a standard playable effect, and it's going to be in Standard for 3 years. So even though I don't see a home right now, it doesn't mean we won't see Golbez in the future. But the problems I see right now is, first off, Dimir decks just don't want this. They don't have artifacts, really, so this isn't going to do much in just like Dimir mid-range. And then the artifact decks that we do have in Standard, like the Simulacrum Synthesizer decks, they're kind of in the wrong colors, and they don't really have creatures. So I don't know if you'd play this if you don't have creatures to get back from your graveyard. If you're just surveilling one whenever an artifact enters, I'm not sure if that's enough value. The other issue is, you would think this card, as we were talking about with Contraband Kingpin, would be a nice wall against aggro, right? You're playing against a red deck or whatever, and you drop this, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to take damage for a while. I'm just going to block. It gives me time to set up my game plan. But that plan just doesn't work in current Standard, because everyone in aggro is playing Monstrous Rage. So this is a card that right now, it can't do its primary job, which is to gum up the board early against aggro. But once Monstrous Rage is gone, and I'm becoming more and more convinced that they will ban Monstrous Rage during the yearly update before we get to rotation. I would be shocked at this point if they did not. Unless Final Fantasy somehow, like, completely changes the meta and the red decks are not a big piece of it anymore. So I think this is a card that once we get to the ban list update, once we get to rotation, it's going to be worth reevaluating. In the current meta, there's no home. It lines up poorly with Monstrous Rage as a blocker. But once we get to rotation and hopefully Monstrous Rage is gone, then Golbez might actually be pretty useful as an early game 2-drop, and we can build an artifact deck around it. If you go back to Modern, this card almost becomes more appealing. There's a lot of Modern decks built around cheap artifacts, like Mox Opals, which makes you play more artifacts, Mox Emery, Mishra's Bauble. There's been plenty of Modern games where I've had someone drop like an Emery on me on turn 1. It's pretty easy to go like land, artifact, artifact. So getting up to 4 artifacts seems pretty realistic. You already got cards like Emery that are filling the graveyard, or we've seen some Asmo Underworld Cookbook decks that can make a ton of food tokens. You're going to be surveilling, you're getting stuff in and out of the graveyard. So I actually think this could be a Modern playable card. I don't think it's like busted in Modern. You still need a lot of artifacts to really get it going. But in some sort of like artifact deck with Emery where you're just dumping your hand to cheap artifacts, Golbez actually seems pretty powerful. Like surveilling for every artifact that enters is powerful. And then eventually get to the point where getting some card advantage and some damage out of it. In Commander, there's a few different things to do with this card. It's probably going to be at its best as a commander in a deck that's making artifact tokens. So stuff like Warren Soul Trader, Pitiless Plunder. As you make these artifact tokens, these treasures, you're going to be surveilling with Golbez. And if you add something like Academy Manufacturer to the mix to make even more artifact tokens, it's pretty easy to get up to 4, even 8 artifacts on the battlefield. And then you're getting a lot of value out of this 2-drop. The other thing you could do with this card that's kind of funny is play it with really high-powered creatures that put themselves in the graveyard. So, for example, Phyrexian Dreadnought, a 1-mana 12/12, but when it enters, you gotta sack 12 power worth of creatures, or you sack the Phyrexian Dreadnought, or Death Shadow, a 13/13, but unless your life total's under 13, it's just gonna die when you play it. These cards seem really sweet in a Golbez deck. Phyrexian Dreadnought probably even the best since it's an artifact too, but if you can get up to 8 artifacts, you can like get the Phyrexian Dreadnought back to your hand, hit all of your opponents for 12, and then you just play the Dreadnought again for 1 mana, sacrifice it, so your next end step, you can do it again, hit everyone for 12 again. So if you build around it, this thing can deal a lot of damage once it gets going. Even outside of just being a commander, it seems fine in the 99 of artifact-based decks, especially like go-wide decks. Brea can make a bunch of Thopter tokens, and you're going super wide, so you're getting a ton of artifacts on the battlefield. Mishra maybe, Eloise making tons of clue tokens, already like surveilling, so I think it'd be good there. There's even Mirko, which actively cares about surveilling, so if you can get enough artifacts in your Mirko deck, maybe your Mana Rocks or whatever, Golbez seems good there as well. So Golbez, this card, I think, could have a home in Standard once we get to rotation this summer. Short term, I don't think it lines up with the meta that well. There's just not a home for it in Monstrous Rage's True Brutal. In the short term, though, fun commander card for artifact decks or a build-around commander. We also got a new saga with a very hard to pronounce name. Summon Brynhildr. Let's go with that. It's a 2-mana 2/1 Saga Knight. First lore counter, exile the top card of your library. During any turn that you put a lore counter on a saga, you can play that card. Second 2 lore counters, when you cast your next creature spell this turn, it gains hasten till end of turn. So Summon Brynhildr, I feel like this card reads like a good mono red card. If it was 2018, 2020, 2015, I would be like, oh my god, this is one of the best cards in the set. Like, it's kind of like an Abbot of Carol Keep, which saw a lot of play in the past. Giving haste kind of reminds me, I know it doesn't do the same thing, but kind of reminds me of Kamano Faces Kazan, which was a staple of red aggro decks, still see play in older formats. Yes, it doesn't stick around for that long, but a 2-drop that comes down, draws you a card, gives your next 2 creatures haste, that seems like a pretty good mono red card, but I'm just not sure we live in that world anymore. It is worth pointing out that the card draw mode is dependent on you putting a lore counter on a saga. So if you're not playing a saga deck, and this is like the only saga in your deck, in theory you could play this, exile a card, and be like, all right, next turn I'm going to cast that card. But then your opponent cuts down or burst lightning it, and you won't have a saga to put a lore counter on, so you don't get to cast it. Although I think it kind of naturally protects itself from this, because do you really want to spend a removal spell on a saga creature that's only 2 power and going to sacrifice itself in a couple turns anyway? Probably not. So you should be able to get the card advantage out of it. The reason I'm skeptical of this card in Standard is not because the card is bad. I think the card is good, but when you think about red decks in Standard, there's 3 reasons I would say that I'm not convinced this card actually works that well in the current red deck. So red deck number 1, Corey Steelcutter decks, cares about slinging a bunch of spells. Summon Brynhildr is fine, but it's not like a prowess card, so I don't think it fits in prowess. The other big red deck is like the Manifold Mouse style deck, and it's built around mice synergies. So since Summon Brynhildr's a knight instead of a mouse, it doesn't really work there. And then the other problem is, one of the most powerful aspects of this card is giving your next 2 creatures haste. That's a really, really strong mechanic, but that isn't actually that useful with a lot of the red cards in Standard, because many of the best red cards in Standard, Monastery Swiftspear, Slake Shock Show Off, Screaming Nemesis, and a bunch of other ones, already naturally have haste. That's kind of like the calling card of red decks in the Standard, is pretty much everything's hasting itself, and that's why Authority of the Console sees so much play. So if most of your creatures already have haste, giving your creatures haste doesn't actually do all that much. So this, I think, is a really good mono red card. If we just had generic mono red, like the Hazoret deck from years ago or whatever, Ramenamp red, I think this card would be very solid. But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I think this is a good card that just doesn't quite fit with what red's doing in current Standard. I think the best home for this card in Standard is actually not red. I think it's actually the Delirium decks. And we've seen Delirium actually be sneakily one of the best decks in the meta that no one plays. If you look at just like tournament data from the last regional championships, Gruul Delirium actually has the highest win rate. The problem is it was played by just like a few people, so the sample size is really small, but his win rate was like in the 60s or something. It was just crushing people. And I think Summon Brynhildr actually fits really well in that deck. It actually can take advantage of haste. Hasting and like a fear of missing out or whatever is very good. It's got 2 card types. That's kind of one of the tricks of this Delirium deck, is it really wants artifact creatures, enchantment creatures. That's why you got Patchwork Beasties and fear of missing outs. So this is another enchantment and a creature in your graveyard. And in a deck like Delirium that needs things in their graveyard, sacrificing itself might actually be an upside. This is an enchantment creature that's going to draw you a card, give you some value, and then put itself in the graveyard to turn on your Delirium. So I'm very interested in this in Delirium style decks. I think that's the kind of shell where this is going to be at its best, not just generic mono red. As far as Commander is concerned, I don't think this is actually designed to be that much of a commander card. I think this one really is designed to be more of a constructed card, but it seems fine if you're playing a deck that actively cares about sagas, Tom Bombadil or Sigrid or Ivor. If your commander just wants as many sagas as possible, this one's fine. It's one of the cheapest sagas out there. It has fine abilities, and commander giving things haste is very powerful. So I'd play it in saga decks. Not sure what other commander decks I'd play it in though. So Summon Brynhildr, very solid card, seems great for the Delirium decks in Standard, and maybe in the future, once things change, could be a good mono red card too. We also got a new white legend in Venat, Lady of the Light / Hadolin? Let's go with Hadolin, Mother Crystal. So the front side of this card, Venat, a 3-mana 3/3 Legendary Elder Wizard. It's a white card. It says when you cast a legendary spell, draw a card, this ability triggers only once each turn. And then it has 7 mana, tap it, exile target non-land permanent, transform it only as a sorcery into Hadolin, Mother Crystal, a 4/4 indestructible god. This says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control until your next turn it gains indestructible. And if it's legendary, draw a card. So Venat, this card, it's kind of like Welcoming Vampire for Legends. It's like a Riki, but it only triggers once each turn rather than every turn. But I think the front side of this card, in a deck with a bunch of Legends, is actually kind of fine. We've seen Welcoming Vampire see competitive play in the past just as a source of card advantage. And I think that Venat, even with the once per turn restriction, can kind of do the same thing. And the once per turn restriction probably makes sense. You don't really want people to like play this and pop off with Mox Ambers and Mox Opals and so forth and just draw their deck. That would be kind of ridiculous. But I think in some sort of Legendary Matters decks, Venat seems perfectly fine as a 3-mana 3/3 card advantage engine. And then when you flip into the backside, you get another utter end, and then the backside is actually relatively powerful. I mean, 4/4 indestructible makes other things indestructible. In a legendary deck, still going to be drawing you a card each turn. I will say, again, that like 7 mana and sorcery speed to flip these cards, not especially realistic in Standard. So I'd be surprised if we saw the flipping all that often. I think it's one of those like 5% abilities where like 95% of the time you play this card and it's just Venat and it's drawing you cards. And then like 5% of the time you end up in this game where you get a bunch of mana, the game goes super long, your opponent's tapped down, or you know they don't have a removal spell because you duressed them or whatever. And you're like, yeah, all right, let's flip it around and go to town with this indestructible god. So it's not going to happen often, but when it does happen, it's going to be pretty powerful. I think in Standard, the question is, where does this fit? We don't really have a legendary deck in Standard to power this up, but we definitely have the pieces to build a legendary deck in Standard. We have legendary 1-drops like Skrelv and Basri and Lost Jide. We have Zach Fair now, Arieth Gainsborough. So thanks to Final Fantasy and really other sets as well, there's just so many legends these days. If you want to build mono white legends or some 2-color white based legend deck, the pieces exist to do it. In Commander, I think this is going to be one of the better mono white legendary commanders. I think my personal favorite is Gandalf the White, since it's kind of like a legendary Pandermonicon. People also play Yoshimaru, Teshar you can use because Historic works with legendaries, but we don't have that many mono white legendary commanders. So if you want to build mono white legends in Commander, Venat, pretty powerful. Like we talk about a lot in Commander, the 2 most important things: mana advantage, card advantage. Mana advantage, card advantage. Well, Venat doesn't give you mana advantage. It does give you a very steady source of card advantage. Also cute, in a like Gandalf deck, because the easiest trick to get around the once per turn restriction is do things during your opponent's turn. So if you have Gandalf, all of your legends have flash, so then you cast one during your turn, draw a card with Venat. On your next opponent's turn, cast another one, draw a card with Venat. If you're drawing 4 cards each turn cycle, then Venat's actually an insane source of card advantage. The other place this card's good is in the 99 of other Legendary Matters decks. If you're playing Joda or Dahada or Radadropic or Sisay, and most of your creatures are legendary, and most of your non-creatures are legendary, I think I play this pretty much every time. This is the welcoming vampire for a Joda deck or a Dahada deck, any Legendary Matters deck. So Venat, we'll have to wait and see in Standard. I think it's powerful enough, and there is enough support that we can build a Legendary Matters deck around it. How strong it'll be, that remains to be seen. In Commander, super fun as a Mono-White Legends commander, and good in the 99 is like a legend welcoming vampire in any Legendary Matters decks. As far as lower rarity cards, we get a couple more Chocobos, which I don't think are constructed playable, seem like good limited cards, but I want to shout out just because Chocobo's kind of my favorite part of the set, plus Summon Fat Chocobo. Kind of funny, I think that's kind of my spirit animal from the set. The dude looks like he's living his best life. As far as good lower rarity cards, we have one that I think is the best town payoff in the entire set, in Travel the Overworld. So it's a 7 mana blue sorcery, but it has affinity for towns. So if you have 5 or more towns, you can cast it for 2 blue mana, and it says draw 4 cards. So if you can get at least 5 towns on the battlefield, this might be the best card draw spell ever printed. Like, if you think about what it costs to draw 4 cards in Magic, the baseline rate at sorcery speed, Tidings, draw 4 for 5 mana at sorcery speed. We saw Into the Story be kind of a standard staple in Eldraine Standard. It is an instant, but it was mostly a draw 4 for 4. And then in older formats, you got like Meditate, which is a draw 4 for 3, but you gotta skip your next turn, which is a huge downside. So all this to say, drawing 4 cards for 2 mana is a literally off the chart rate. Even at sorcery speed, this card is still incredibly efficient. And I think we have enough pieces to make a town mana base. Like, I think starting town is going to be a standard staple just by default because of the lands we're losing at rotation. So I think a lot of decks are going to start with 4 starting towns. And then if you want to actively try to up your town count, we got stuff like Blam, Garden City Academy, pretty solid land. We get all the common dual lands. You got stuff like Adventures in, which is fine. All the adventure lands like G-Door. So I think it's definitely possible to build a mana base that can support this card, and this is going to be a huge reward for doing so. Also sweet that we get another payoff to go with Wandering Minstrel. Wandering Minstrel, super cool card, but when we were talking about it yesterday, we're like, we just don't have enough other town payoffs to really build a deck around it. But now that we get Wandering Minstrel and Travel the Overworlds, the possibility of building like a town deck for budget Magic in Standard becomes much more realistic. So Travel the Overworlds, you gotta play a bunch of towns, but if you play a bunch of towns, the card is an absolutely busted source of card advantage. Finally today, just a little bit of draft chaff that you can check out over at MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our penultimate day of Final Fantasy spoilers. So what do you think of today's cards? How good is the Soul Sister equipment? What about the rest of this stuff? Let me know what you think in the comments. And I'll be back tomorrow, I believe. I think we should have enough cards to round out the set for one more daily dose of Final Fantasy spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? We can find yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe check out the Against the Odds where I tried to build a deck that would never lose to prowess.